Welcome to Facets of Design, a podcast brought to you by Lixil Global Design. I'm your host, Paul Flowers, Chief Design Officer of Lixil Global Design and Global Brand Identity. In this podcast, we dive into bold ideas, groundbreaking changes, and creative challenges that are driving the future of design. Get ready for inspiring conversations with some of the brightest minds and creative talents in the industry. Okay, welcome to the Facets of Design. My name is Paul Flowers. I'm the Chief Design Officer and Brand Identity at Lixil Global Design, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Massimo.
Thank you.
Massimo is from, obviously, it's no real introduction, but it's from Buster and Punch. And Massimo, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Massimo Buster Minale. I am the founder and creative director of Buster and Punch. From London, live in Stockholm, a little bit Italian, so a bit of everything. But yeah, it's lovely to be here, guys.
Great. Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited because this is our first podcast in a series that we're doing. And what we're going to be looking at is really introducing different people from the creative industries that have really built their careers in very different ways. And the idea is to share those insights with the audience and hopefully create a really interesting dialogue and something different to what's out there. So if you're a student, you're studying, it'd be interesting to find out how people have, what educational background they have, and then also how they progress through their career. So maybe we can start with that. What did you study at university?
I studied architecture. I went to Cambridge University, did my degree there, and then went to UCL, the Bartlett School, to do my master's. So I basically studied 7 years plus to become an architect, and then I pursued an architecture career in London, worked for some of the sort of most seminal architects. I worked at Zaha Hadid's, Norman Foster's, Richard Rogers. So I had a real sort of baptism of fire in the architecture world. To be honest, I found it very slow. My brain works in very fast pace, so I struggled with the slowness of architecture, although I loved it as a discipline. So I actually started to make motorbikes in my spare time and metal bits and little bits of products, and I found a lot of sort of solace in that world and sort of the quickness of making stuff and giving it to people and getting their reaction. So that sort of led from one thing to another, and I started Buster and Punch basically, which is essentially my passion of three things that I love the most, which is architecture, metal and motorbikes, and we sort of built this whole world around it. And yeah, that's kind of how I got started into the product world. Yeah,
that's really interesting. Talking about architecture, obviously we as a company, Lixil, we interface a lot of architects. They're one of the key stakeholders. Obviously they install our products, they specify our products, and as product designers, which we have 8 design studios around the world, more than 120 designers around the world. We're product designers, so we're working on lots of products each year, that are in the hands of billions of people. Literally more than 1 billion people use our products every day. But the refresh cycle and how quick the projects are, of course, are much faster than architects, and they're very ergonomic and hands-on. And it's quite interesting seeing your transition from architecture, which you say that can be 5-8 years, to come to fruition, a project. Whereas we're working on those things that are normally about 18 months, and they are very handheld, like you've moved into now with some of the products that you produce now that we'll talk about. But they have a very different feeling. They're closer to the user. They're very tactile, and they have very different visceral elements to them. Yeah. So maybe that's quite interesting, actually, just to talk about that for a second. Obviously, going from those big elements, the architecture, all the way down to now the kind of products that you make, which are more interior focused, I guess. What do you get out of that let's say satisfies you more than say the architecture?
First and foremost, architects have always been obsessed with small metal things that you touch around spaces, essentially door handles and light switches and bath taps and things like that. They've been obsessed with them from the beginning of time. My main interest was, how can I take that interest and bring it into a sort of consumer space and make it exciting for someone that has never bought a light switch or didn't know a metal door handle sat on the market. And I think that's where I found the most joy, actually, in terms of cadence and pace, is sort of taking these very tactile small bits of buildings, things that live in the shadows and only architects talk about at Milan Design Week, and sort of thrust it into the face of a consumer and make it really exciting, and we did it, or I did it in a way that we sort of manipulated or used the fashion playbook. So we built lots of an amazing world around these products and lots of great production content, and just made this world exciting. And I think now it's a very different space. Everyone knows a light switch, everyone knows a door handle. They understand that, how they feel, the quality, the craft involved. But I think for me, I love the fast pace side of design. I like the cultural aspect. I like when you catch culture in terms of products, and I struggled with that at architecture because it is a slow, honourable, amazing discipline, but it doesn't have that sort of culture catching fire that you get in products. So I've always wrestled with that a bit, but I think it's really interesting to look at anything from the small bits out rather than the out in. When I started architecture, there were no interior design departments. There was one interior designer at Norman Foster's of 150 architects, whereas now you walk into Norman Foster's, it's probably 50-50 split. It's become so important that interior space interaction, almost as important as what the building does in a sort of a bigger form. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting when you talk about the emotional elements, especially that you get, like I said, from the smaller objects that you do interact with. They're often kind of forgotten, right? Because you take them for granted. You're not really thinking when you turn a light switch on or a door handle, but I think you are when it has that tactile feedback. You start to feel the quality. It has a very different relationship, and I think it signals to the person interfacing with that particular product about the quality and the kind of choices that are made in a home. So I think it does say a lot about you, the kind of things you choose for your interior. It's become much more expressive.
Yeah, I think Buster and Punch basically products, as I said, started as a slight hangover from making custom motorbikes and things in a garage. And one of the first things that we brought as a brand to the interior world was this machine cross-nail pattern. We were the first people to bring it into, I guess, a consumer space and interiors. And that was a hangover from motorbike handlebars, motorbike pegs, things where you needed a tactility to it, a grip. And I wanted to bring that excitement of turning a motorbike handle into the home of opening a door, and essentially that was always been the big sort of challenge, is how can I do that and explain it in a way that a consumer will catch it. But I think the craft and the feel of products, especially now, has become even more important, actually. In a world where we've got 10 times too much product than we need, actually sort of quality and honest craftsmanship's coming back into the spotlight. You walk around Milan and that is the big focus at the moment. So yeah, I've always loved that. I've always loved making metals and the craft of it all. Yeah,
that's actually quite a nice lead on to an area that we've been, let's say, exploring right now, and that's in the digital world where many companies and brands have gone full digital. It's really difficult for brands like ours that have brands like Grower and Grower Spa, which are, let's say, premium brands. How do you demonstrate the quality, the tactility, the fit, feel, finish of that product? That's why we attend things like Milan. We've just had a huge trade fair and as a brand, we're really investing in those big consumer architect, all those interaction points, because you can't really express that in a digital format. People have to come and touch your products. You want them to hear how a product feels, all the engineering that's gone behind it, and those and the passion that designers put into those products to make them feel, look, sound a certain way. And that's why somewhere like here, we're here this week, of course, in Milan Design Week, and we have an exhibition here, and we're really exploring exactly that. We're exploring not just how beautiful the products are, which of course is really important and a big emotional connector, but also how can we do that through technologies? How can we start to make the technology more emotional, engaging, and share with people how we focus the technology also to solve a consumer problem or pain point, or to create a particular experience. So what we're doing right now is, like in this exhibition, is bringing those two elements together. Obviously the aesthetic, but also the kind of beauty in the engineering, the technology. That makes sense.
It makes loads of sense. I think especially now we're seeing this sort of massive neo-analog movement, which is basically, you know, people, and mostly young generations or young kids that have lived in a digital landscape, and now they're fatigued of it, they're bored of it, they want sort of human grounded emotional interactions. And I think that that's exactly it. You know, we're in a space now as designers, we need to understand how we can connect those digital landscapes, especially for the younger generations, into more emotional, tactile experiences, you know. And that's why we talked about this earlier, you know, before we did the podcast, that, you know, Milan is, the whole week is not just about the trade show where there's lots of people punting products, but actually it's more about the sort of experiences, the human interactions. And, you know, I walked around Milan yesterday, and literally every sort of third shop had a massive queue of young people out of it selling, you know, one was ice cream, one was a special coffee, one was a special cake. And they're all things that young people have found in TikTok or found in their digital lives or digital worlds. And they've come together as a community, and they're experiencing it as a community, and it's more grounded and emotional. And I think, I know it's a slight sidetrack from what you said, but I think there really is, you know, for designers, our next big frontier is how we can bring that quality experience, that community, and merge it with the fact that, you know, we live in digital landscapes, they're not going away, you know, and how we make that exciting. And like you said, make content or make experiences that can really purvey your passion, which, you know, as growers is making products, and say with Buster and Punch, you know, it's metal things, and how we can make those exciting for a younger generation, you know, not just old people like us, Paul. We've got to think about the next generation. So I think it's really interesting though, that neo-analog movement, I'll call it, I think is really catching speed, and we need to start thinking about younger people, and especially at Milan Design Week.
Absolutely.
You know, so, but yeah.
That kind of digital fatigue is quite interesting actually, because I just think now about my daughter, she's studying for her A-levels, and she started to go back and study in the library, and I've started to really see, like you say, that need to go back and have that physical connection. After this kind of digital desert, you know, people are starting to connect again in an interesting way. And I know the kids are always really fascinating when we get the, you know, when I get the albums out and I start to get the vinyls out and play music. They're fascinated that and the ritual of that thing really has appeal now for people. So, you know, we're really pro these kind of events, and I think the more people that do come together, because I think that's what creativity is. It's about cross-fertilization. I don't think there's anybody in particular, you know, has the idea, the best ideas that I've experienced with our team. They come from like a sparring process where everybody builds together. Now, of course, there's often a definitive choice that you have to make, but I think that process of coming together and exchanging is really powerful. It can take you into different directions as well, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
And how do you work? Obviously, because you're the founder of Buster and Punch. Yeah, I guess you get to say ultimately exactly what you're doing, but do you work with people? I know you've done some interesting collaborations, which I want to talk about in a moment. But how does your design process work?
I think that the products and things that I design are essentially sort of a byproduct of everything that I see, everything that I experience, everything that inspires me, everything that I love, mainly in London, because that's where I've always operated as a designer. You know, and I kind of see, I guess, no difference between the aesthetic of a product, how it's inspired, how it's built, and how it's shot. It's all the same thing for me. So like you said, I think it's the whole journey, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it really is. It's those people that inspire you need to be in your products. And I think, you know, that's part of the, I guess, you know, the almost sort of cultural relevance of Buster and Punch is the fact that, you know, we don't just put a product in the shop window and ask for people to buy it, but we've always told the story of where it's inspired, what we love. You know, we tried to do it in an honest way, and I think that's come across from day one where we started. So we've always sort of trod this line between being an interior brand and actually being a fashion brand, and trying to sort of weave culture and subcultures and the city that we love and the things that we love into our products to make them different and unique, I guess, although they are just light switches and door handles. But that's kind of how you catch, like I said, you catch culture and catch people's imaginations to come into our world. You know, lots of Buster and Punch customers, they don't read Elle Decor, they don't look at Architectural Digest, you know, they like music, they like pizza, they like whatever, you know. So that's sort of the world that interests me the most. Is actually not this world or this igloo that we sit in, sadly, Paul, but actually the world outside of it. I think it's much more interesting to get people outside into our community, to be honest.
Well, that's I guess that's a nice lead on to the collaborations you've done. I mean, when I first met you, I think it was in the East End of London, and you were just doing a launch with Staub, was it? Yeah. And I think you had Professor Green. That was a bit of a shock for me, that kind of having him involved as well. For people who don't know out there, Professor Green's a UK rapper, I guess, and I think somehow you managed to talk him into
an aged UK rapper. And part-time dad, as he says. Yeah.
Should be full-time
dad, part-time rapper. Really nice guy.
Yeah.
But that's exactly it. I mean, collaborations. We do a lot of collaborations. It's been part of the brand since the beginning.
Yeah.
We've worked with lots of friends, and I think the Staub thing was a perfect example of that. This idea of getting inspiration from other cultures, music. We had Tom Sellers as well, was part of the project, who is was the youngest Michelin-starred chef in the world, an amazing UK chef. And they were all part of this project, and it wasn't just the product that we made that was beautiful, but it was all the content, the cultural references around it. We sort of shone a light on English greasy spoons that someone in America will never have been to, so we're trying to tell our story and sort of export it to the world. But I think collaborations, they can either really hit or really miss. The ones generally that miss are the ones that are just sort of commercially focused, and the ones that hit and normally the ones that are two different industries that come together and collide in a almost awkward way. They're always the most interesting, because they throw up all different questions and new shapes and new forms and new cultural reference points. So I think the Staub thing was really interesting for that. And
it was very different, right? Because we've worked with people in the music industry, you've worked with people in extreme sports, I would say.
Yeah.
Obviously, everything down to the greasy spoon that you mentioned as well. So I guess going across all these areas, how do you go about selecting, or does that happen with a meeting with somebody and then it just works out? How does that go?
I mean, to be honest, all the collaborations we've done to date are all friends or customers or people that like the brand. I think that's pretty important for collaborations generally. I think everyone should be invested and love the project. So generally everything we've done with, and like you said, it is a broad range of people in different industries, have all essentially been friends of the brand, friends of mine, as with you guys.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're new friends, right? So we hope that's gonna develop, of course. But it's really exciting. I mean, for us, obviously, we're working in lots of different materials in our industry. So obviously, everything from ABS, but also to lots of metals, predominantly brass, but zinc, copper, all of those things. And we're using some really advanced now surface techniques like PVD. And what I wanted to ask you again was just a little bit about the color, material, and finish. And how important that is in your brand as well, and how that represents itself as a part of the interior. Because architects, of course, are looking often to create, and consumers looking to create this holistic space. So how do you go about choosing your colour, materials and finishes?
I mean, it's a tough one for us, because our whole brand is essentially colour, materials and finishes. We are metal experts, we're metal obsessed, we've always worked with solid metals. All of our products are not really designed in a computer. They're actually designed on a workbench in a garage, or in a workshop. And that's how we start a project, is from a sort of tactile material perspective. As a brand, we've always wanted to bring across this idea of making it easy and fun and exciting to match all the metals in your homes.
Yeah.
So we only work with 4 different finishes today. We do some sort of experimental stuff with metal. We only ever work with metal, solid metals. It's a beautiful sort of honest material that kind of goes in every interior, with every tile, with every floor. So we're kind of set up to just be a CMF department, essentially, as a brand. We do some experimentation with metals, as with you guys. We launched a lovely finish called Burnt Steel, which is where we took titanium and basically just put a blowtorch to it, and it gives you all these lovely colours that are natural. So we do some innovation work around materials, but we are just, 3 finishes. It's part of our brand ethos, is this idea to sort of, I guess, simplify I think it's really important for the best brands to really be something to someone rather than everything to everyone. So I think it's really important that part of that strategy is, what materials do we like to work with? You might be an innovative material brand that likes to explore all different materials, or you might be a metal brand. What colours are telling people the story or the world that we want to get past? Are we greens and purples and luxury? Are we fun? Are we neons? So I think you kind of need to nail down, I guess, what you're trying to do with your brand or with your products, and kind of stay true-ish to that. That for me is colour, for me is brand perception, rather than interiors. I think in a slightly different way when it comes to colour, but we're simple in terms of material as a brand.
That's quite interesting, actually, that so you lead more from a brand perspective, the selection of the materials you have, obviously, because that's a limited selection you've chosen definitively, because obviously a company like ours, where we have big wide reach, what we do, we use our brand to steer how the product looks. So we have 3 signature elements. They're these kind of visual elements that you see in all of our products. One is a sensual minimalist shape. It's like a lozenge. The other is 7 degrees, which you find in lots of the handles on the taps and faucets. So and that's kind of a product psychology element that guides you to the point of interaction. And then we have a ring, where we use this to highlight kind of elements that are important, but also elements of interaction like buttons and spray faces and those things. But so we use those signature elements to create that aesthetic code, that DNA. But then we use, I guess, the CMF in a broader sense to link into architectural concepts and interiors. So that's quite interesting, actually, that we do that visually as opposed to through the CMF.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you guys are a massive, heritage brand, very different to us. We've been around for a bit, 14 years, and but we're much smaller, and we really need to lean into our niche, and what makes us great. We are, one of the best metal makers in the world. We love metals. We know which metals we can manipulate to be the most exciting things they can be. And so for us as a small brand trying to, punch against you boys, you big boys, it's really important for us to stay close to that niche and understand that every product or material move we make, has an effect on our brand, our perception, things like that. And I do like to try and see it as a whole thing, which is why we see certain metals and, different colours as more brandy things and suggestive pieces rather than, I guess, interior trendy things or whatever might be in terms of spaces. So I think,
Well, I actually, talking about that, because I just realised I'm obsessed with one of your products. I know we talk a lot about the metalwork part of the brand, but maybe some people out there don't realise also, but you do things like a thing I'm obsessed with, which is your whiskey cabinet.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Tell me a little bit about that, because that's got obviously woodcraft, it's got everything in lighting, it's got all the elements. I'm obsessed with that thing.
It was our first product. It's called the Rockstar Bar, and actually when I started Buster and Punch, first started, we were more of a traditional furniture and lighting brand. So I was like, everyone was doing furniture and lighting, we'll do furniture and lighting. So I actually made a bike for a few of the guys from the Rolling Stones, and they caught wind that I was an architect and asked me to make a bar for their homes and So I sort of put all these bits together in the garage, made a bit of wood, got some friends involved, and we kind of made this beautiful home freestanding bar, never been done before. And it was the first interior product ever to have a whole feature in Rolling Stone magazine. So we'd never been in an interior magazine.
Amazing.
None of the press ever talked about us, but we were sort of suddenly in these like music mags and fashion mags as like having the must bit of furniture that all the celebrities want, and we've sold them to George Clooney's got one, Brad Pitt's got one. I don't want to name drop, but all the big A-listers have got.
Amazing.
And strangely enough, the thing that people talked about the most from our big Rolling Stone editorial was actually the knobs on it.
Oh, really?
And that's how Buster and Punch sort of evolved. It was like, hang on, actually they're really excited for these handles and stuff. Should we make that a product? And then we made a handle, and the handle became a light switch. And then so there was a sort of cultural, accidental element to the brand as well. It wasn't all sort of intentional, but everything came from that one product. We still sell it today. It's beautiful. It's very unique, And yeah, we're really proud of it. But it does stand out like a sore thumb from everything else we do.
Yeah, I guess when you try to post-rationalize the brand journey, I guess sometimes where you started and where you ended up is very different. But I guess that's what made you what your brand is.
I mean, very recently we've just dropped the motorbike section for our website, which has always confused people. Like, I might say light switch, but I can also get a motorbike. Well, yeah, you can, but there's like a 10-year waiting list. So we're slowly sort of trying to clear up the offering and really get people focused on what we do best. But it was an exciting jumble set at the beginning.
Yeah, because that's your passion, I guess. That's the whole starting point.
Yeah, it was just loads of stuff that I loved on a website.
That's amazing.
Like, what is this? Yeah,
but that's what I think when you speak to lots of designers, that's how it really starts, right? It's either when you're a child, you're interested in those creative elements, and that kind of comes through. And I've spoken to lots of people, and even with Lego for them, maybe it started off just building stuff, just creating stuff, or creating a collage if you're a sculptor, or you're bringing stuff together. I think those elements of just expressing yourselves and experimenting, they can lead to, like you say, completely new, different directions. Yeah. And it doesn't mean for people out there listening, it's not where you start sometimes, like with what you've just explained, the bar, etc. It doesn't mean that's going to be where you end up. This journey is it's non-linear. It can go in different directions, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you start in the most honest way possible, and like I said, how I design is everything I love I put into what I make, and it could be anything. I could make anything. And I think, there is a slight fraction now in the world that, with social media, people have a more of a commercial starting point, should we say, and you have Pinterest, and, you get lots of iterations. And I think it's really, really important for, young people to lean into their differences, lean into what makes them unique. Don't take older people's advice on stuff on what they should do. Don't look at the data, don't ask ChatGPT. You really got to sort of lean into your strange world in your head. And it's like Milan Design Week. All the best stuff is stuff that's hanging out in universities or in the back of trade shows with strange countries, abroad. And I think all the young stuff, it has that sort of energy. Maybe they're not going to be commercially viable, but it is just so much more exciting as a starting point, except obviously for the grow thing, which is really exciting. That's full circle, you see.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it. But I get your point, and it's true. And to be fair, that's why, we've got lots of our team here from all over the world this week, our creative team, because we gather trends and insights from these things. And like you say, they often come from not the big manufacturers. They come from small collaboration startups. They're all culturally relevant. We learn so much from them, and that's why the team are here this week, really gathering those trends.
Yeah, nice.
Talking of trends, actually, I guess what big trends you see, macro trends you see happening in society right now that you're concerned about or you're excited about?
As we spoke on before, I do think it's really exciting about how we, bridge those sort of digital landscapes with real experiences and real-time action. And I think that is our next big frontier as designers, especially designers that have been in the industry for 10, 20 plus years. I think it's really important to engage young people, speak a language, not just in terms of where you're sort of posting ads or posting content, but a language in terms of the products itself. There's more of a tech sensibility. How do you sort of bring that into your product? So I think that is the next frontier. It's like, how we bridge this digital landscape with physical craft, and making it exciting for all generations, not just people that read Elle Decor or kitchen magazines. And I think, that's kind of where my head keeps going back to. The problem is I'm getting older, so I'm like, oh, shit. So I'm just like, ask my kids and stuff, know. But I love, I love young energy. I know that sounds strange, but people like Saka and Central C and all sorts of stuff, young British export energy is where I'm always drawn to. And I think, it's just a shame I'm getting older.
Well, you say that. I think it's quite interesting. I read this. I won't say which watch brand, but there was a watch brand, and it had, I think it's 3 or 4 founders. And I remember that, and they did incredibly well. And then after a period of time, sales started to dwindle a little bit, and things weren't quite working in the same way. And basically what they realized was they just got old and they were irrelevant. I don't think that's age is a thing. It's just that you have to, as a designer, be objective and keep going out and finding new things. And like you say, and in your team as well, we're very lucky because we have a big team. We have different people of all ages and backgrounds and different things. And that diversity really brings insight into us, represents people. That's why we have design studios in Tokyo, New York, Shanghai, Singapore, London, Düsseldorf. We have, all these studios all over the world to get that cultural input and that melting pot of ideas. And I think even old people like you and me, I don't know if you're older than me, I'm not sure, but even older people like us, as long as
I'm definitely younger than you, Paul.
Are you?
Just for the record.
I don't know if this is going out.
I think they
on
can
the film.
actually see on the cameras.
We'll take a poll afterwards. We'll do a poll. I'm not sure.
How many years younger?
Not sure. I've had no work. But I think as long as we stay objective, I think it still can be relevant, right? Because you often see these cyclical things. Do things really change? When I was younger, it was very physical, and we had vinyls. And I remember in my house, we had one of the first televisions that had a remote control.
I can't remember vinyl, Paul.
Yes, you can. Don't pretend you can't.
I'm the mini disc generation.
Maybe see, he's led me down this path of old. But we had a television that had the remote control came out the TV on a wire and came round the back of the couch. So
that's your evidence. That's your evidence there.
But I find that insane. And I ended up actually going and working for Philips TVs in the end, designing plasma TVs and stuff. So I was really fascinated on that move from this physical really into the digital, but never really lost that connection with opening up a vinyl, reading the cover art, and and that paper, that sound of the paper that you pull out, and the smell and all those things, and and the stylus not being perfect and having to replace it and maintain it like a car and stuff. And you have to maintain those physical things, I guess, like you have with motorbikes and those things. There's an element of human care that you have in those things that you don't have that relationship with some of the digital, I guess.
Yeah, I think like you said before, I think if you can lean into craft and sort of honest materiality, it's always a good way to go. I've come from a sort of design background of simplicity wins all. Whether it's a product aesthetic or a message you're trying to get across, you need to distill everything into what that one thing is. And I learned that in architecture. I learned it from my dad. I just think that's the key to design. And the problem now is obviously there's so much of it, and like you said, it's really important to take it all in, but I think it's also really, really important to understand what is the one thing that you're trying to tell with that product or message, right? And sort of throw everything away. It's almost as if product is more about what you've removed than actually you've ended up with. So but yeah,
I think that's the hardest thing, isn't it? I think in design, it's the hardest thing is to refine and to take away. And when you have this crazy plethora of choices, it's like, which one do you choose, and being decisive. And that helps if you create the brand, a direction that kind of guides you a little bit, that can help. But at the end of the day, the choices are what make the product relevant and useful. Everything we do has to be useful, otherwise what's the point? Because it's taking resources from the planet and stuff. Amen. So it should be good. Right, so I guess we can end on that thing. We've got another few minutes. I was going to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind. We're going to ask some questions now that we're going to ask everybody that's on our podcast. So I'm going to fire. So
do it.
So I hope you relax, sit back, enjoy the questions. Okay, so what does good design mean to you?
I think first and foremost, good design needs to be unique. It needs to be accessible. I think it needs to. I like design that has a cultural relevance when it's born, and retains that relevance over time. Maybe even gets stronger, that relevance. And I think just like you said, I think good design is just stuff that the world's screaming out for rather than puts up with. I think that's key, especially nowadays.
Yeah, I love that idea. Good design it's stuff that people didn't know they needed, but when they have it, they really appreciate it. Amazing. Okay, second question.
Yeah.
Okay. Which designer, past or present, has had the most significant influence on your perspective of design, and why?
I'll say my dad, Marcello Minale. He's passed now. He's passed a long time ago, but he had a quite a seminal graphic design company called Minale Tatterfield, which actually used to have offices here in Milan, and he was the driving force behind lots of the fashion houses in Italy. So he designed the Gucci G's, he did the Fendi logo, the Armani logo, and all the brand around that. He also did furniture design as well, and lighting design, and was actually a really interesting guy. And he was the guy that taught me, you know, that simplicity is the most important thing in design. And I remember being a kid, you know, having tables full of bits and bobs and ideas, and watching my dad sort of throw stuff in the bin and take screws out and remove legs and try and distill it into its simplest, most powerful form. So I think definitely, my dad.
Wow, that's quite an emotional answer, actually, isn't it? Wow, that's incredible.
But he was also never around, and but it's not therapy, so let's not.
We'll get a bigger couch for you later.
Good designer, crap dad.
We'll park this at the back. That's it. No, I mean, talking about that less is more and those things. I mean, you know, designers like Sam Hecht and Nato Fukasawa and those, you know, I kind of like those designers as well, which have. And Dieter Rams did it, I guess, into a certain extent. Just took away. He had that thing. So Venedict design, be Merklich, like as little as design as possible. Just stripped it back.
Well, I mean, if you look at the world, you know, all the best things in the world are the simplest. Paper clips, Fiat 500, Beatles songs, every Oasis song ever made. You know, just really simple, hit you over the head, and everyone can have access to it. You know, I think that for me is the key to good design. Yeah,
I love that. Okay, great. And lastly, love or hate it? What current design macro trend can't you stop thinking? I know we spoke about this a little bit, but what macro trend can't you stop thinking about? What's really, and I guess it's still this digital thing. Give me another one. We've spoken about digital.
I'll give you something tangible. 70s velour and corduroys. There you go. I love it. I love it.
Okay,
but I don't have a brand that does fabric, but I really want one.
Okay, if we
want to wrap the house in it.
If we're not filming right now, if this just goes out as a voice podcast as well, just to let you know, Massimo's sitting here and he's wearing corduroys. So
I am.
He's
but I want to wrap my house in it. I just want everything in corduroy. Yeah, nice burnt orange as well. So that's my jam.
I do love that, actually. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's been an absolute amazing time to have you here and talk about design. It's something we're hugely passionate about. We're going to be hosting these podcasts with a number of people, and I think the insights that you've given will help young designers that are coming through and studying. Because what's going to be interesting about this series of podcasts, I think, will be to say you don't have to follow one route. And some of the reflections you made about you started in one direction, making motorbikes, and you've ended up making handles and switches has been the main area for the brand. I think that's really inspiring for people, because people should know we don't have the answers. Nobody knows where they're going to end up, but just do what you love, do what you're passionate about, and at least at the end, you'll be in a place where you've done things you can be proud of and you love doing. So
I think that's right. Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate you coming.
You're welcome. Cheers.
See you. Thank you so much for listening to Facets of Design from Lixor Global Design. Please be sure to subscribe, share and follow us on Instagram at Lixor Global Design. Stay tuned for more insightful conversations with innovators shaping the future of the creative industries.